So good morning, everybody. We're very happy to welcome you to this discussion on shifting the architecture of nutrition in humanitarian context. My name is Barbara de Carles. I work for DG ECHO as team leader for a number of policies, including nutrition, and it is my pleasure to moderate this discussion. We see, despite years of scaling up nutrition, we see growing needs. Less than half of the children who need treatment do not have access to it. And while needs are increasing due to a combination of climatic events, escalation of conflict, and economic impact of the Ukraine crisis, it is important to accelerate the scale-up and increase our engagement in prevention. One of the ceilings of nutrition treatment is scale-up of funding, but we cannot expect to double the funding available and to sustain it in the long run. The shift of approach is necessary. ECHO is engaged in supporting innovation and help document evidence for more efficient programming. We trust these efforts will bear fruit and will be endorsed by WHO guidelines to be released in the coming months. We're all working towards a fundamental shift in the way we tackle malnutrition, a shift that sees prevention being prioritized, treatment more widely accessible to all, and funding strategically mobilized and allocated in order to accelerate and sustain innovation. Let me introduce the four panelists that will animate and provide a lot of input to this discussion. Sol Ignacio Guerrero Oteiza, sorry if I didn't pronounce it right, is Senior Advisor at UNICEF. Sol has spent much of the last 2 decades driving efforts to improve the way we prevent and treat child wasting in emergencies and non-emergencies alike. He has served as Senior Advisor for Nutrition in Emergencies and currently focuses on financing for child nutrition and development. Prior to joining UNICEF in 2019, Sol was a director at Action Against Hunger, USA and UK, where he founded the first global coalition to address child wasting, that is called No Wasted Lives. He started his career working with Valid International in the research, development of the community-based management of acute malnutrition, that is also known as the CMAM approach. Sol has worked with governments, UN agencies, civil society, and communities in over 20 countries around the world. Next to Sol, let me introduce Julie Gauthier, who's Development Director at Nutricept Development. Julie is working at Nutricept Development as a co-general manager and new developments director for 3 years. At Nutricept Development, she is responsible for supporting the Plumpy Field network in their current strategies for new developments to prepare tomorrow's strategies for the network. Julie joined Nutricept in 2013, acting in the operations and project management at France regional level before moving to Asia regional director position. Prior to that, Julie served as key account manager at Unilever Food Solution and as product manager at Fox Pâté Europa Corporation. She started her career as marketing strategy specialist at MyMedia. Julie earned a master's degree at Audencia in business and entrepreneurship with a specialization in social responsibility, and she broadened her competencies studying in Sweden and Mexico. Welcome, Julie. Next to Julie, Yakowenko, correct? Ellen is project director for scaling nutrition at the International Rescue Committee, the IRC, where she leads the delivery system for Scale project in partnership with UNICEF, Action Against Hunger, and Save the Children. Prior to joining IRC, Ellen was based at Action Against Hunger USA for 9 years, where she led a diverse portfolio of research activities focused on innovation in the prevention and treatment of child wasting, especially in resource-constrained and conflict-affected environments. Over the course of her 18 years career, Ellen worked with and across a variety of donors, academic, UN, and NGO agencies to move evidence into action. She completed all but a dissertation at George Mason University School of Conflict Analysis and received both a master's in international development from American University and a dual bachelor in biology and Spanish from St. Mary's Honors College of Maryland. Welcome, Ellen. Last but not least, we have Kedar Mankat, who's Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in the Global Policy and Advocacy Division working on nutrition. In his role, he focuses on nutrition financing, child wasting, and nutrition products, and on nutritious food systems and climate change. Prior to joining the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he worked at the One campaign on policy and advocacy with the Agriculture and Inclusive Growth team, and has also spent time researching the environmental implications of globally traded commodities such as soy, palm oil, cocoa, etc. He began his career in international development by serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Middle Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Kedar has a master's degree from the Yale-Jackson School of Global Affairs, where he focused on global food security and the origins of the 2007-2008 food price crisis. So we have a fantastic panel with us today to discuss the shift in the nutrition architecture, and let me turn to Saul, who's going to introduce us to the topic.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks those of you who are here with us today and those of you online. It's great to be a part of this panel and this conversation. There isn't an awful lot of talk about nutrition at this event. Will you believe it? There's a food and nutrition crisis. For some reason, we're talking about a bunch of other things, which are super important, but this is, believe it or not, the one and only nutrition conversation that is taking place over the last day and a half. So we have a lot of pressure to tell you a good story and to tell you something meaningful. And just to kick us off, I wanted to give you a very short summary of why was a shift in the way we do nutrition needed. Why wouldn't we just continue doing what we have always done? Because none of what you're going to hear from the rest of the panelists in this session can be appreciated for being powerful if you don't understand what problem it's trying to fix, right? So the way the nutrition has worked over the last 20 years, and this is a caricature of it, right? So I know it's an imperfect description, but it's really been governed by a certain number of things which have remained fairly static. Now, here's the thing. If you ask somebody who works in nutrition or that works in the humanitarian space about innovation in nutrition, everybody will say something like plum peanut. That thing, changed the world. But that was like 30 years ago, right? And so it cannot be that it continues to be the one and only example that people have about what has changed. And that, I think, captures a really important point, which is, while some things have been remarkable in the way that they have been developed and introduced into this space, so much of the attention has gone into those developments that we haven't paid attention whether the substantial systemic way in which we deal with the problem has changed at all. I'll tell you a few ways in which it wasn't changing. The first is the funding. Most of the nutrition that happens in the world, if you look at any analysis, has stagnated except humanitarian funding for nutrition. You cannot do breastfeeding promotion. It's increasingly hard to find funding to do that outside of emergency context, but the amount of funding for nutrition from humanitarian donors has remained always on the last few years on the up. But that in it brought with it other things. As Barbara was saying, a great deal of emphasis has gone into let's treat the problem. Why? Because for humanitarian donors, I would argue, it's much easier to explain to their leadership why treatment is a life-saving thing. Let's not debate it very much. If there's one thing we're going to invest in nutrition, it's this. But that also means, as Barbara was saying, that prevention has been heavily oversimplified. The narrative in nutrition in emergencies has been dump food assistance is the answer to prevention of nutrition. When people say there's no money for prevention, that is untrue. There is billions of dollars being put into the prevention of malnutrition, but it's being put into one basket, which is food will take care of the problem. But the numbers of malnourished women and children absolutely prove that it's not true. It's not enough. It doesn't mean that it's a bad investment. It means that it's not enough as a single investment in order to prevent malnutrition. The other part of it is the products that we do have continue to be produced by a group of private sector partners that have almost been left on their own to make sure that they had what we needed when we needed it. What Nutrisaid was able to do, or the problems that they were dealing with, that was their problems. They were not our problems, right? We thought there's a market, whenever we have the cash in our pocket, we'll go into the market, we'll buy the product, and then we'll be fine. Their reality was very different, of course. This is not how, they didn't experience it in such a positive way. And I think that we spend, especially in the humanitarian space, an awful lot of time asking ourselves, what do the UN and NGOs or local organizations want to do? But nobody seemed to think that the government should have the driving role in this context, oftentimes because we knew that these governments were either somehow involved in the crisis that we were all trying to support, or because we had this idea that somehow the answers to what needed to be done in nutrition had to come from us, not from them. And yet, we talk about ownership and localization and accountability and responsibility and transparency, but yet every fora where we talked about nutrition in emergencies, it was between the same non-governmental players of the equation. So over the last 5 years, I would say all of this has started to really shift. And I can't put my finger on why or whom or what is behind this shift, but it is remarkable in one feature, the shift, in that it is everybody is pulling in the same direction. And this doesn't really happen in all of the conversations that are taking place right now simultaneously. There are bigger problems, more prominent problems, sexier problems, but I dare you to find a problem where every major actor is actually pulling in the same direction to make the solution better. What you're going to hear over the next few minutes is developments and shifts that are happening that are helping us to tackle some pretty fundamental questions, which, for example, what do the national governments want to do about this problem? If they were given a choice, what would they want to prioritize, right? Or where should the money to pay for all of the work that we need to do should come from? Where should it come from? Nowhere does it come from. Where should it come from? And how can we use that money most effectively? And why would we consider the problems of one another each other's problems? Why? Why would we do that? Why not just focus on our problem and let everybody else fix it there? So if I can leave you with just one message out of this before we jump into what will be a much more exciting panel discussion, is that whatever you thought was happening in nutrition, that is changing. And it's changing in ways that are not visible, but that have this amazing potential by virtue of the fact that nobody is obstructing change. Everybody is trying to move the obstacles out of the way to get more impactful and to get more effective at doing what needs to be done. So on that note, I'll hand it over to you, Barbara, to walk us through it.
Thank you, Sol. And I think that's very encouraging to hear that everybody's moving in the same direction and that the changes are happening now. Let me now turn to Ellen, and you will talk to us about the field and ground perspective. What would you say is the most visible sign that things are changing? Over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I would say the most visible sign that things are changing has been the excitement that I've heard from country-level stakeholders in their ability to really do things in a different way, and a tangible kind of excitement to continue to do that more. So in the project I'm working on at the International Rescue Committee, we're working in partnership with UNICEF, Action Against Hunger, and Save the Children to deliver technical and operational support to 13 different countries on the front lines of the food and nutrition security crisis. As they attempt really exciting maneuvers to rapidly accelerate and bring wasting treatment to scale, acute malnutrition. I'll use wasting and acute malnutrition interchangeably here. And even though the challenges they face are staggering, there is that excitement, which has been provocative for me to see. And I think the more fascinating question is, why are we seeing that excitement? And in particular, why now? It all comes back to COVID-19 in the way that I see it. And COVID has really been a launchpad that catalyzed the acute malnutrition treatment and the nutrition sector in really profound ways. I'll mention two here today. First, in moving evidence to action, and second, in taking those concrete evidence-based actions and transitioning them to scale. So first, when it comes to acute malnutrition treatment, the trickiest, kind of stickiest problem that we've faced for decades has been one of coverage. And at IRC, we estimate that typically only 1 in 5 children are able to access treatment when and where they need it, which means that 4 out of 5 children simply are not able to, and that's unacceptable because of the high risk of mortality. So we have been on a real journey and a quest, even in the before times, before COVID, to find innovative, smart, evidence-based ways to close that coverage gap. And all of that really innovative research has left us with a suite of different innovations, broadly now called simplified approaches, that allow us not only to simplify treatment, but to streamline it, make it more efficient, and provide increased value for money. So what we saw is that these innovations, even though they weren't intended to be used, obviously, during the pandemic, were uniquely situated to allow us to continue to respond in the highs and the lows amid the shutdowns and social distancing. And I'll highlight 3 particular innovations here. We started embracing family-level screening that allowed caregivers, just like I as a mom would use a thermometer to detect a fever in one of my kids, allowing mothers and other caregivers to detect acute malnutrition in their own kids so they can monitor for changes in deterioration. The second innovation around embracing community health workers and the role that they can play in taking treatment out of the facilities where they could be exposed to COVID and having it be something that's closer to the household level. And then finally, in terms of the dosage of treatment, we've been looking at ways to really simplify that dosage and reduce it so that we can treat more children with the same amount of product, again, closing that coverage gap. And during COVID times, that also allowed us to reduce the frequency of follow-up so they weren't exposing themselves to come to the health facilities more often. So that kind of suite of innovations was available prior to COVID, and COVID really forced our hand to use it in a more widespread and integrated way. And that brings me to my second point, which is around taking evidence-based actions to scale. In line with all the evidence that we saw before COVID, having this implemented widespread in practice, we saw that these innovations continue to be safe, effective, provide good quality of care, and also made things quite a bit easier when they're implemented in practice. And now, 3 years into the pandemic, we're still seeing them be used. We're still seeing a lot of interest in it, and we're pushing into contextualizations. There's no one-size approach here. It is a suite of different approaches, and all of the countries that I'm working with right now are adapting, using different approaches, different combinations of approaches in different regions and areas of these countries. So each is embracing a different innovation in their own way, and it's been exciting to see them take it up, continue to use it, and have really interesting conversations about what it means for their context. And I'll end here by saying that with the project that I'm working on called the Delivery Systems for Scale, we're really diving into working with and supporting nationally led and driven processes, bringing this toolkit along with us to support them in achieving that change.
Thank you, Ellen. Very interesting. And I hear a lot of excitement at country level to do things differently, so that is very encouraging. It sounds like the changes are not the result of what is happening in the field, or not only, but also a rapidly changing science and evidence. Let me turn to you, Kedar. What is the science telling us about what works for the prevention and treatment of malnutrition?
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks everyone for joining. I think we should start with the premise that once a child is wasted, we've failed the child. And so, I think the science has been evolving. There's been some interesting work just over the last year, and the recent UNICEF report on the status of women and girls' nutrition, I think, lays out 3 key areas. One is that a lot of the wasting, or I guess you could say child malnutrition, happens in the first 500 days from conception. So a lot of talk has been on the first 1,000 days. I think we're learning that a significant amount of the impacts of maternal nutrition happens in that first 500-day period. And so the impacts on the child are quite intense during that. And so women's nutrition is really critical. But I think what we've seen, again, and UNICEF laid this out in the report, is that things are moving in the wrong direction. And so just two data points probably worth noting. One is, I think we've seen the sort of gender inequality of food security roughly double from 2019 to 2021. And we've also seen, I think, acute malnutrition in women and girls rise in crisis-affected states by 25% in that same time period. And so, if we want to make progress on child wasting and on malnutrition, we have to start, should be an obvious point, with women and girls. Not just if they choose pregnancy, but of course because it's important in its own right. And I think the evidence around what to do about this is also, I wouldn't even say it's emerging. We've had a lot of good evidence for a very long time about maternal micronutrient supplementation, as an example. This is a standard of care in most so-called developed countries. And so that transition from moving from iron folic acid supplementation during pregnancy through to multiple micronutrient supplementation can have really significant impacts, both for the mother, but also for the child. And we're also seeing advances with things like balanced energy protein, where acute malnutrition is prevalent, where we can, again, make significant progress on maternal nutrition. And of course, even after the child is born, I think there's a significant amount of work, of course, that can be done on the prevention of wasting. And I think one area that is of particular interest, particularly for the foundation, is around the transformational evidence that we're seeing around the impacts of small doses of lipid nutrient supplements, especially, and of course, in highly food insecure environments where dietary diversity is perhaps unavailable to populations. And what we've seen with SQLNS is that it can potentially prevent a third of cases of child wasting. This is the product itself. Thanks, Julie. And then the impacts as well on stunting, on anemia, on developmental delay, and even on mortality reduction. I think up to 27% are the figures. And there was an article in Nature Food that sort of laid this all out in great detail. Are really, I think, sort of game-changing in a way in terms of how we think about what is the package of both products and services that we can provide to mothers and children around the prevention of child wasting. And then there's new and emerging science, I would say, not just around the prevention side, but also on the treatment side. Oh, wow, already 4 minutes? I was like, I'm going to be 2 minutes max. So, so very quickly, we're investing, in some multi-country trials around ready-to-use therapeutic food that is directed at the microbiome. And what we're seeing is that, one, this is a non-dairy product, and dairy is the #1 cost contributor to RETF. We're seeing in some early trials that this is non-inferiority in terms of recovery and superiority in terms of prevention of relapse of wasting, which is really critical. And so we're very excited about, especially with the new Codex guidelines coming out, the potential to really shift the landscape to scale innovation while staying really grounded in delivering high-quality services and programs, so that we're giving kids the sort of best start in life that they can possibly have. Thanks.
Thank you, Kedar. And I think it's very interesting to hear that innovation and research can bring a number of new products on the market. Let me now turn to Julie from Nutriset. With all these new products for prevention and treatment gaining widespread support and recognition, how will production stay ahead of the game?
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to all of you for the passion. So yeah, we have been working on product for prevention for the past 10 years, including BEP. So ours is called Plumpimem, or SQLNS. Ours is called Enough Nutributter Plus. And now I can say that we are ready. We are really ready for scaling up of prevention. And for that, we need to act together. If I only had 2 messages, it would be those ones. We are ready, but at the same time, we are still working on it because what we are passionate about with Nutriset and the Plumpy Fitness Network is really to try to innovate, to do the best thing for children and for the population, and to increase the impact. And what we are doing right now is to continue some research with partners, with academics, with Gates, with a lot of people, to continue to be ahead of nutritional science and continue to find improvement on product, but also on process and packaging. If I just give you an example, we have been working lately on a new packaging for SQLNS. This is a daily packet, and we are working on a weekly packet. And doing a weekly packet could permit to increase the impact in terms of children, because it will decrease cost, and it will also permit to increase the production capacity of the factories, while permitting a better use on the field, because you would have less sachets to give, and of course decreasing the impact on the environment. So this is one of the innovations we are working on right now. And at the same time, we are still working on localization. This is really what we believe in. Localization, meaning producing the closest to the needs to permit nutritional autonomy with the Plumpy Fitness Network. And what we really want to work more on with all of you guys, because we need support on that, is to target 100% of the raw materials coming from local sources, with working on the local agriculture value chain and the local transformation of the raw materials. So this is some of the thing we are working on, and for the rest, I just wanted to say that I need that we continue to work together. The way we worked on that talk was really like partnership spirit, and I think this kind of transparency, trust, is super important to succeed in scaling up prevention of malnutrition. This is for permit better localization. That we need, first of all, visibility, like long-term visibility. Where it will happen, in which quantity, when it will happen, to be ready. Because it's a lot to put in place in some difficult environment, like we have a factory in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Madagascar. I say we, but indeed it's local entrepreneurs. In Burkina Faso, in Niger, in Nigeria, a lot of places. It's difficult environment, and it cannot be done like that. So if we continue to work like that, like with transparency, with partnership, I think we can succeed to make it right.
Thank you, Julie. And I think it's very interesting to hear the importance of localization, local supply, local value chains that are key in the treatment of malnutrition. And I would also like to repeat what you said at the beginning. We're ready to scale up production, and we need to do it together. So I think this is all very encouraging and certainly going to help us to keep or bring back nutrition higher on the agenda. Now, let me turn to you, Kedar. Why would donors try to solve the challenges faced by the private sector producers responsible for these products?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So I think, first of all, I think it's important to know that funded demand, at least at this point in time, until we have a paradigm shift in the way that products are procured and purchased, is largely driven by donors. And so when the signals that donors send are inconsistent, whether that's too little funding or a surge in funding, it makes, and Julie, of course, would know this better than I do, it makes the ability of producers to appropriately predict how much capacity they're going to need extremely difficult. So you can imagine if you're running a business and you didn't know whether your factory, whether someone was going to purchase 2 or 200 widgets from your factory on any given day, what investments you would need to make in paying staff, in hiring staff, and in your sort of capital expenditures as well to run the factory. It is extremely difficult to imagine that would actually be a successful model. And so all that to say, we have, I think, a real-time example of this in that last year at the UN General Assembly, many donors stepped up around child wasting. $577 million was committed at that time, led by USAID. Donors roughly funded, doubled funded demand for ready-to-use therapeutic foods. I think what we quickly realized, together with UNICEF Supply Division and Procurement Services, was that suppliers actually didn't have the capacity and the financing that they needed to build additional capacity to be able to actually meet that funded demand. And so from the foundation side, we made a $50 million pre-funded guarantee to finance direct, indirect, and capital expenditure costs, essentially allowing UNICEF to front load 70% of payment to suppliers in order for them to be able to move from essentially what was on average 60% nameplate capacity to 100% nameplate capacity. Since December, we've seen actually really strong uptake. It solved, and this is through 2025. So that solved an initial and immediate crunch because of a significant surge in demand from funders. But I think that was, of course, just for ready-to-use therapeutic food. And if we start talking about the preventative products, that many of which will likely come from the same set of suppliers because they use the same sets of ingredients, we're going to need additional funding from donors and potentially additional financing as well in order to be able to bring manufacturing capacity, especially around the preventative products, up to meet future demand. So that's sort of in a nutshell.
Thank you, Kedar, and more encouragement on the funding side. We've now already discussed the flexibility, the new evidence, and the availability of essential commodities. Now, let me turn to you, Saul. Do you feel that we can power all of these changes without changing the way we fund it? So that's the transformation of the way we fund all this work.
Not at all. I mean, not at all. But like categorically so. If we don't do something about how we fund this, none of this is going to be taken to scale. And I think that it's something we have known in the I've been working, I'm told, fairly young. But I started working in the humanitarian space 20 years ago. And we have been talking about the inadequacies, the insufficiency of humanitarian funding for 20 years at least. And so to say that it's not going to be enough it's not the easy or the hard question. The hard question is why and what do we do about it, right? And I think the answer as to why is because it's too short term. It's there's too many strings attached, and there is it results from problems rather than it stems from the desire to prevent problems. Unlocking humanitarian funding for nutrition requires that you have rates of malnutrition that are already a problem. So we cannot then somehow ask for the money to be given. We worked on preparedness and anticipatory action and all of these things, but the reality is that hard humanitarian funding requires a humanitarian crisis in order to flow. If not that, then what? We figure, well, we don't exactly know, but we sort of know a couple of things. One, that we need to be able to centralize the conversations about funding for nutrition. Gavi will do that for vaccines. The Global Fund will do that for malaria. I ask you who is trying to coordinate funding for nutrition, none of you know. The answer is there is no such a thing. And there might never be such a central, I think, for good reason, because this isn't about buying a vaccine and then shipping it out. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But, and no offense to, I mean, as UNICEF, I'm allowed to talk about vaccines. But the point is, we pieced together something called the Child Nutrition Fund, which we announced at the General Assembly event that Kedar was referring to last year in September, because we realized that the donors were asking for it. They're like, oh, gee, I wish I knew what the other donor was doing. And we thought, well, that's easy to solve, right? Like, I just need to put you in a room and say, speak. And then that happens. Everybody gains visibility. But what we also realized is that there were donors that were going to prepare to come to the table because they believed in this, but not in the way that we often ask them to come to the table, which was, can I have some money from you as a grant? If you were willing to say, in what terms are you prepared to be part of this effort, and meet them where they are, suddenly we realized that just about anybody could contribute to this if we were smart enough. As Kedar was saying, they have a problem in translating $300 million worth of orders of RUTF on short notice because we cannot pre-finance legally. What do? They create a vehicle, right, to pre-finance, but then we need to find somebody to de-risk them, because they don't want to take first loss if we fail to pay up. And then we find another player that will de-risk their measure that is meant to cover the shortfalls of our measures. So the point is, if you are willing to put and invest time and energy in asking people in what terms are you prepared to come and be part of this conversation, you will be amazed by how many people are willing to enter this conversation and how much you can maximize the amount of funding available for stuff. And it's just the beginning. Parametric insurance has not been brought into nutrition. It has not. But the time is up, right? We cannot keep on saying, oh, gee, we know what the triggers are, but we cannot get the money early enough. This is what parametric insurance was invented for, right? Impact bonds have been, in use for a number of things. We just brokered a partnership, or we're in the process of brokering a partnership here in Europe with the Gates Foundation for polio. We can do things that we haven't yet started to do, but what we lacked was a space to even begin that journey with the amount of trust that was needed. And that's, I think, what we tried to do with the Child Nutrition Fund, and which we hope will transform all of this.
Yes, Julie, do you want to compliment?
If that's possible, yeah. Just to add to what Kedar and Sol just said about this pre-financing system, just to say that it really changed the game. When I'm talking about partnership, just a few minutes ago, it's really that, like some years ago, as private sector, we were seen as the evil, but really what we are talking about, the Plumpy Field Network, is just SMEs in programmatic countries, in super difficult environment. If I take the example, for example, of Sudan, they don't even have a bank system running, So it's super difficult environment to get the raw materials. If I talk about Ethiopia, there is a war going, so they don't have dollar to buy the raw material that is missing in the country because of the war. The environment is super difficult, and it's small family business every time that just do this type of product because they want to help, because they want to help their own population. So just wanted to say that it changed the game, and that they need support. They need visibility, and they need support. They need to be able to buy the raw materials locally with improvement of the local value chain. They need support. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And I remember, I will take out that we need more longer-term support for nutrition, and that's definitely important in the Nexus approach. So it's not only humanitarian funding that we need, but also development funding. And I would just like to add that we also, as ECHO, doing more efforts in this sense with the pilot programmatic partnerships that we are funding, both with UNICEF and with Concern on this topic. Now, let me turn to you, Kedar. Why would non-humanitarian donors want to be part of this effort?
So I think this has maybe already been answered, but these are common problems, and we need to work together around the solutions. As Saul noted, from the foundation side, we track obviously ODA going to the sector, going to nutrition. If you look at the basic nutrition code of the OECD DAC CRS, 60% of what was funded in 2021 came from the humanitarian side. That is new. That has not always been the case. And so what we're seeing is that multi-year development funding for nutrition is really tailing off. One, sort of annual funding for humanitarian assistance is really taking up the bulk of what used to be for longer-term development assistance. And so for a development actor like the foundation, it's an imperative that we ensure that we're aligned, coordinated, and working together with the humanitarian sector to ensure that we're solving this problem of malnutrition. The prevention, early detection, treatment of child wasting, of course, is primary. And so, we don't have a choice, basically.
We don't have the choice. I think that's the key word. Now let me turn to you, Ellen. All of these different efforts seem interconnected and dependent on one another. How has this level of alignment been achieved across different actors? And where are the national governments in all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to the technical alignment around the innovations and approaches that I mentioned earlier, we're also seeing alignment at international and regional levels to really get behind and bolster nationally led plans and strategies to take wasting treatment to scale. At IRC, we know that to achieve treatment at scale sustainably, we have to work with and kind of help national governments to make sure that they're able to capably do it over the long term. And the project that I'm working on is attempting to provide that technical and operational support to help them do it, even in humanitarian context. But we also see that type of approach to get behind nationally led strategies in a bunch of other areas, including in the way that the Global Action Plan for Child Wasting was developed. The backbone of that is really the country operational roadmaps that were designed for and by countries. And we're also seeing it now with the Child Nutrition Fund and the way that it is being developed and funded, as it includes that matched co-funding from countries as well. So I think that Saul mentioned vaccines and malaria earlier. Those are very good examples of other sectors where we've seen success in taking different innovations to scale. And what I'm seeing right now in terms of acute malnutrition treatment is that we have the same constellation of activities at the ready. And it comes down to a trifecta. First, that kind of acceleration and interest to achieve scale aligned against all of the partners. Second, the innovations at the ready and the interest to make sure they're getting into practice. And then third, agreement that we have to do it with and through those country-level, nationally led strategies, plans, and processes. And with that, I think we're going to be in a very different place even this time next year than we are right now.
Thank you, Ellen. And I think everything that's been said during this discussion is very interesting and encouraging. So would you like to add something on this point?
The government of Mauritania is not the government that you think right away, if I said to you, who is visibly doing the most in terms of taking care of the nutritional costs. But last year, the government of Mauritania covered 100% of their funding needs for ready-to-use therapeutic food or plum peanut. And how did they do this? They do this because they give a damn, right? In spite of what everybody seems to think about governments, they actually do care. And second of all, because we put in front of them a tool that enabled them to do so. And it's the one-to-one match that Ellen was mentioning. For every dollar that the government of Mauritania put towards this, we give them one back. And we knew that they were doing it, that it wasn't just a promise, because we were helping them procure it. So they would give us $1 million and we would give them $2 million worth of product. So we were matching it during the transaction. And in doing that, they were able to then commit to say, first year I'll cover 25%, the second year I'll cover 50%, and the third year I'll cover 100%. So in 2023, They will pay 100% of the cost of this product. And that means that ECHO doesn't have to worry about Mauritania, right? And who's going to pay for these products. And that we start getting the level of ownership that I think we're going to need if we're going to succeed with all of this.
Thank you. That's very encouraging. Let's hope that other countries follow the example of Mauritania. It's time now for questions from the floor. So we have about 10 minutes. We can take a couple of questions.
I'll give you mine.
Hi. That open. Nicolas Lacroix from Action Against Hunger. My question would be for Ellen. Ellen, at the end of the day, I mean, solution to reduce costs and increase coverage has been at the top of our head for many, many years. What is, and at the end of the day, NGO like us, like Action Against Hunger, are the one who need to make internal changes in order to make those costs. And unfortunately or not, we have become big ships that are very slow to move. So what are, from what you've seen, what are the biggest hurdles, or let's say the one hurdle that organizations like us need to overcome, to transform in order to make some of the change that you've identified earlier on in your presentation happen? If you would name one. Thank you.
I would probably say, to be very honest, managing our own expectations about the timeline and how countries are going to do it. A lot of this is a paradigm shift for us, including at the IRC. We don't expect countries to necessarily take the full package, the full suite of interventions, including the standard protocol, and implement it everywhere right now. They're going to do it on their own time and in their own way, and we have to allow flexibility and adaptability in that approach and work with them to understand which tools they're ready to implement right now, which tools they may want to continue to test in the future, and which tools just may not be applicable given the opportunities and challenges in their context.
Thank you. We have another question from the floor?
Yes. I'm Pep Reed from the GECO. Well, you have mentioned a number of innovations, procedural or ways of working, technological innovations as well, which are all very promising. They look very promising. But my question, every time I hear about innovation, is about adoption of this innovation. So, especially when you work with big organizations, innovation is very difficult to adopt. Small organizations are more flexible, more agile, but sometimes when we talk about nutrition, we're talking about big organizations. So how do you see these innovations being adopted? What is the time frame you see? The difficulties have already been commented, but yeah, I'm always worried about innovation. It's always very exciting, but takes time and it's difficult. How do you see that?
I don't trust anybody who tells you that they are innovators. You should not trust anybody because it is so easy to say and it makes you look so cool, but very few people are actually doing anything meaningful worth the title. So you're right. This is always my starting point too. I think there's a couple of answers to this, some of which we didn't cover. The only person that no offense to the rest of you, that I think would have been great to have on this panel with us that isn't here is WHO. Because the piece here as well for us as one of the players in this space is we're not going to roll out something that a national government doesn't have a policy to use. Right? It's not for us to tell a country, your people ought to be eating this. Or, that this is not for us to do. So the big question for us has been, as we do all of this, right, because this has been a machine, is the policy and guideline environment keeping up? The reason why WHO is not on that chair is because right now, literally right now, they are releasing the revised guidelines on how to do all of this, which includes most of this. And rewind a month ago, the Codex Alimentarius for the first time introduced a description of what this is, which allows the microbiome dairy-free formulas to be used. The Nature paper that we released to talk about this was signed with, the World Bank and UNICEF and WFP and everybody to sort of say, hold us to account for now rolling this out. So that's the piece of this story that is missing, but that without which none of the uptake at scale would happen. Is we need to make sure that when we go to governments, they go, I don't know what you're talking about. WHO is telling me to do something else. We need to make sure that that didn't happen. But I would say that the challenge that we have right now is one on this question of can we produce them at scale? Because the shift, if it's already shaky as a market, how much am I going to be asked to make? Imagine if it's a new product. When are you going to ask me to make more of this and less of that? They have no idea. So we need to start giving the producers greater visibility, and we need to tackle the money question. Because we're a middleman. Very handsome, very equipped middleman. UNICEF, not me. But we depend, right, between us and the people who need to be using these things. The uptake for us, as I said, it's the easy part if the funding is there. And the challenge that we need to crack simultaneously is who is going to pay for innovations to be scaled up? That is the question. Because I would say every other part of it, I feel like we're trying to stay in tune. No? Kind of? Yeah.
Thank you. A follow-up question, Pep?
Yes, sure. No, I was talking more about institutional inertia, of well-established ways of working. People who have been there for 30 years and tend to keep doing the same. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, this can't change easily. It cannot. You're right, 100%. And that happens not only at a global leadership level, but also at a country level. And this is where it's a bigger issue because for many of these big institutions, they're so decentralized that it's the local voice on the issue that really matters, right? That it makes or breaks. But I think that this is maybe I shouldn't say this on camera or with this audience, but I'll tell you how I experience it. People think that smart advocacy, don't sign a petition, but smart advocacy and push that we can block it and do what we were doing anyways, and that's actually not how it works. The more you say this, you need to change. You're not moving fast enough. The option of what we want you to do collectively, or we would expect you to do is in front of you, jump on it. What are you waiting for? It actually helps us unblock the internal challenges because these things stagnate in the dark. So don't keep them in the dark.
Thank you, Saul. Do we have a final question from the room? Else, we're running a little bit behind schedule. Can I turn again to the panel? And we will go starting from Kedar and finishing with Saul. If you would leave the room with one point, one message, what would it be?
So I think the message would be, especially given the audience here is from the humanitarian sector, that from the development side of things, especially on nutrition, we are, you have willing partners. We want to work together. We want to get creative, especially in terms of the financing and funding solutions in order to reach scale, both on the product and services side when it comes to the prevention and treatment of child wasting. So you can count on the Gates Foundation to be at the table in those conversations.
Thank you. Over to Lou, Eileen.
Yeah, there are a lot of problems in the humanitarian sector that don't have clear solutions right now, but when it comes to acute malnutrition treatment, it's not one of them. We know what works to treat kids. It's rigorously backed by the evidence, and we know now how better to get to scale. So really what we need to do is attach rocket boosters to that, and we have a lot of aligned efforts to do that right now.
Thank you, Eileen. What about you, Julie? What do you take out of this discussion?
I would say that I think we are all ready to see this change, to go for prevention, to go for localization. We didn't discuss it a lot, but I'm pretty sure we are all ready to decrease our impact on environment. I think all of this needs to be done together at the same time, which is now. And that we can succeed in doing it if we do it together in partnership, with trust, with transparency. I think we can succeed.
Thank you. Over to you, Saul.
The last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we listen. We fixed what we heard you say needed to be fixed. We did things that you told us couldn't be done, including getting on stage and speak from the same sheet. But the next 10 years, whether all of this succeeds or not, will depend on people who are not sitting at this stage but are sitting in the audience today.
Thank you. Let me now just maybe take a number of words that have been said by all of you, and for me that are key, the question of localization. And you've certainly heard over the course of the last 2 days that ECHO has recently released its localization guidance, and that we definitely working towards doing more of that, so definitely on the same line. And I think prevention, reducing the impact on the environment, doing more together, doing it with trust, and that there is hope and there's a solution to the problem. So let me now just thank our distinguished panelists, thank all of you in the audience and people following us online, and let's continue doing more on nutrition.
Thank you.